So I'm starting this project on the back end of the car with the most difficult part, and that's determining how much I can cut out of this, the bottom of the lower trunk area that holds the spare tire and the battery and the fuse box. This is like one of the bulges I have to cut away. I've already cut this section out, and I put a mock-up panel in here just to see how much clearance I'll be able to get. As you can see, this is beveled in this way instead of coming down in this direction. Let me show you what's under here, just to show you what's been my concern as to whether I could do this or not. You see right here, this is the end of the battery box, and right on top of this bracket here sits the fuse box at the rear of the car. So I had to shave this bracket just a little bit to get this angle, and this will have to be boosted up maybe a half an inch. The box itself, which is just below the closure for the rear floor and in the trunk. So hopefully it'll be a squeaker, but this will give me a better visual, having this sweeping away as opposed to, well, you can see what's going on over there. So I'll have to cut this on an angle also and fill that in with some steel. But I'm just starting on this and playing with different modifications on the roll pan and different ideas, and we'll see how it goes from here. So this is what the closure looks like now. It's made out of steel and has some shape to it on the ends, as you can see, because it wants to roll in. On the bottom there's a roll, and on the side there's a roll. And but I'm getting around to the side over here. You can see it follows the angle of the roll pan a little bit better, and of course it'll be painted out black. That's a much better look than that stuff going on the other side. Doesn't look like it belongs there. So now I just got to get over there and repeat the process. So I think I mentioned in the last video that I was going to have to play around with possibly adding to the top of the bumper to try and help get rid of some of the height in this area as far as visually. Just adding a little bit more material to the top of the bumper, and I mocked it up and it did look pretty good, but a viewer suggested that I raise the entire bumper and add to the bottom of the bumper. The reason I can't do that after looking at it for a little bit here is that the contour of this bumper on the side follows the quarter panel at that height without doing some cutting the bumper up and pieing it out and doing some extraordinary things, and I don't even know if it's going to look good at that point. So what I had looked at was, and what I can do is to try and maybe raise the taillight openings up, because that would be a little bit easier to do, and it would have the same the effect of raising the center of the bumper visually. And so there's about an inch of material, inch and a half of material here. It's about an inch of flat here, so I can actually raise those up as I add to the top of the bumper. But naturally I want to see how that's going to look. There's an old lens that I got with that bumper. So I made some mock-ups out of some pattern paper and some vinyl, and I'm just going to stick them up there and stand back and take a look and see if it looks okay before I commit to cutting anything. But that's a little bit down the road. I'm still involved with patching the bottom of this trunk space, and trying to, you can see from this angle how you can't see those protrusions anymore, and this is pretty much where most people will be viewing it. In general, you'd be standing at this height and kind of looking at the car right here. And so I'm still fooling with that. So this is just I was laying on the ground looking at it. I said, you know what? Let me see what that looks like. And so I made these up, and I'll play around with those and see how they look. So I think that's going to work. I like the way that adds more material to the bottom, just by virtue of the fact that I moved the tail light up in the hole. You can see this one here, which is the stock location. And, I cut out, there's 2 inches added to this. So I've got to compensate to bring, the balance back to this whole situation. You can see this is just by adding an inch to the top of the bumper. This proportion looks a little bit better. This is a little hard to see because there's no roll pan here, but you got to kind of use your imagination. There'll be a roll pan all the way down covering. You can see this bumper extension here. It'll cover all of that, so there'll be a roll pan. So this will be much meatier down at the bottom and give a little bit of more balance to that. But I had to try and get that visual line raised up, the belt line, so to speak. I think that's pretty much the simplest solution to that. Also, what has to be considered here is this is all going to be body colored. This will be the same color as the car, so the only thing you will be really looking at as far as a visual will be the parting lines as they go around the top here. And I think raising that up an inch, that should about take care of that issue. Yeah, it doesn't look too crazy. It's not too far of a divergence from the original. Just like everything else, I don't want to get too far away from the original. Just tweak it a little bit without ruining it, which is real easy. Okay, so that's the last piece of that undercarriage that I had to bevel. Of course, it'll be all painted out black, so hopefully it'll be even less noticeable than it is now. Keep thinking I'm going to be getting up off the floor here any minute now, but every time I turn around, there's something else that has to be done down here. I still have to deal with the roll pan, develop that out. Have to deal with some of the bumper structure that's underneath here. So I'll be laying down on the ground for a little while. Anyway, on to the next thing. All right, now I'm going to have to try and figure out a different way to mount this bumper than what I have currently. This is just, I quickly mocked it up here and to get going on the quarter panels based off where the bumper was located in the back, centered up, and so I've got to come around with a different way of mounting it because practicality dictates that you're not going to be able to reach certain bolts once the roll pan's on, once the taillight fixtures are in. There's 3 bolts right now that bolt a plate to the existing frame rail where the stock bumper on the Challenger went to. So it's just a flat plate sticking straight up, and then I have a couple of pieces of 1/2 by 1/2 steel welded to that plate, one there and then one on the bottom on a diagonal, just holding it to that plate. And then I have these temporary outriggers that just bolt up to the body, and they keep it from, it's rotating up and down. It vibrates pretty good. If you leave this out, this is pretty shaky. So this has to go because this is where the taillight fixture mounts up. So obviously I can't have a bolt going through here. Well, I could drill another hole back there, but then this rod is in an awkward spot. The bolts that hold the plate on, you say, well, you just unbolt them and then rotate the bumper out, and that's the way you would mount it. But once the taillight fixture's in, it blocks access. You can't get your hand down or even a wrench down in between to take those 3 bolts. There's 3 bolts at the bottom here. I'll take this out and show you in a second here. There's the 3 bolts. Well, you can see them pretty well now, but once that roll pan is permanently on the car, you have no way to access it. I'm sure on the stock 71 there was plenty of overhang on the car. You could get up in there and do what you needed to do. to dismount the bumper, which, as you can see, there's two nuts welded into these taillight brackets, which are really heavy duty, and I think there was another two above it, and that's what bolted to the substructure, and then the bumper itself bolts to that substructure with these bolts here. I'll be eliminating these bolts, the button heads, and smoothing out the bumper. So I'll be welding that piece permanently to the bumper. So that means I've got to come up with another way to secure it, and that's what I'm working on right now. I'll show you what I come up with when I come up with it. Just want to show you something that I kind of use as a standard for making small brackets. I always like to leave the bracket in the larger piece of material until the very last minute. What I mean by that is that I have two brackets that I'm going to make. The brackets are going to be approximately this size. They'll be this width, but this is the angle. I made a sample piece first to make sure that I had, what kind of material I would need as far as the length and the angle. So this will be bent somewhere along this line right here. And what I'm doing right now is I'm welding a capture nut on the back side of the bracket. So while it's still flat before it's bent, and this is not always possible depending on how close the welds are, so you got to basically judge by the situation. While it's still flat, it's easy to put in the drill press, so I have a lot of control over the piece. Now you can imagine if I made my bracket up and then I decided to drill my hole and weld my nut on there, trying to hold it up at this angle, and it would want to whip around, and I'd have to hold it, probably put it in a vise and drill it by hand. And basically there's not a lot of control of the piece because, number one, it's small and it's got an angle bent into it. So planning ahead, I know where I want the hole relative to the end of the bracket and where the brake's going to be. So it's going to be centered up there. So I'll go ahead and drill it out, and then, like on this side here, go ahead and weld up the capture nut on the other side. So what this does is now that this is welded up, now I can cut it to size, or even better yet, since this is such a thick material, I want to bend this in the vise. I might want to keep as much material as possible, depending on which way I want to bend it or how much leverage I need to bend it. Then what will happen is the hole and the bolt, the hole and the capture bolt capture nut are already there, so that when I have my bracket, I can line it up with an existing tab that I've already welded into position, and I can run the bolt in the exact location, mark it, trim my last little bit off as far as my length is, and tune it in until it's fitting exactly. But I'm back engineering from the bracket that's already on the piece that's going to be bolted to the car, and this is the extension that'll bolt from the car to that point. So instead of putting the bracket on there and then trying to line up and drill both holes through and having a bunch of debris underneath both pieces, as you know, when you drill metal, it splays out on both sides, and in between both pieces it splays out, so it gaps the material. I have two clean holes, and I can get this up nice and tight and tighten the bolt down once it's in place, and then weld it across this seam here, and it's located exactly where it needs to go, and I'm not inside in an awkward spot trying to angle my drill or get in a confined area with a drill and try to make a neat job of it. And so I just thought I'd show you what that process is like, and I try to approach this every time I think about a bracket or an attachment point, is to make the attachment first and then back engineer the part, I should say. I did this with the front fenders when they attach to the nose and the bumper. I put the flanges together first, and then I refined the flanges, and then I brought the fender to the flange, welded it to the flange that was already bolted in place, so that when I separate my two pieces, they're already aligned. There's no trying to put them together, clamp them, and align them, and then drill and put nuts and bolts through. As many times as I have an opportunity also, I try to use a capture nut because it solves a lot of problems as far as accessibility. Now, people say, well, what happens if it strips out? Well, I mean, you're planning for something that's going to happen, what? What are you taking a bumper off every 5 minutes? It's not going to happen that often. But if it does strip out, you take a tap and you retap it. That's all. Had to do that a couple times in my long, illustrious career. It's not a big deal. But anyway, like I said, I'd like to use the capture nuts as much as possible. They help fiddle in with nuts and bolts in awkward spaces, so you only have to line the bolt up and spin it in, and away you go. Also, it's good when you do a capture nut to clearance the threads with a tap, because when you weld the nut on there, it has a tendency to shrink and tighten up. Now, if you want a lock nut situation, it's perfect. But if you're in a position where you want this thing to just spin in by hand because you can only get your hand into a very tiny spot, well then go ahead and tap that out and give it some clearance, and it'll make your life a whole lot easier. Okay, first off, there's those brackets that I was just describing in place and welded up. They come up from this piece that I've added, which is a C-channel. It's an 1/8 inch steel C-channel that connects both of the bumper plates on either side, and then there's a 1/8 of an inch tab coming up here with that captured nut on the back side, and then there's a new tab that I welded right to the side of this housing. This housing is where the 71 bumper normally is mounted by. You see one is broken off here, but there's captured nuts here and here, but there were also 2 more here in this area that I had to cut out to clearance for this structure on the Challenger. So the normal bolt-up points would bolt in from behind underneath the car in a 71. So since this is the main structure that the whole bumper really hangs off of, I'm going to use that structure to hang it off of this car. So we have those 2 points there that are diagonally going down to that bar that connects both bumper plates that are connected to the sub bumper or the frame rails in this car. Then on top here, what I've done is this is all just temporarily tacked. Once I get this off, I'll weld this up good. But there's a 1/8 of an inch plate running across here. In other words, it comes up here and then it L's over. Underneath of it is a piece of 1 inch 049 wall, and that is welded to the upper portion of that plate, that same plate that is welded to the outriggers or the ends of the frame rails. So this through bolts through that 1 inch tubing, which has a captured nut on the bottom side. So this is sitting on top of the 1 inch tube on both sides, and also in this area over here, I've taken my diagonal and I've moved it out away from. It was originally bolted through this point here, but these are actually the points that you've put the taillight housing to. This one here and here and here are both all screw locations. So this is the very end of this inner bracket, and right now I have an adjustable rod on there so that I was able to rotate this up to the exact height that I wanted to and tighten that nut down. That's good, and I'll replace that with a stationary rod without an adjuster, and it bolts up to an existing stud that's sticking out of the Challenger here, and then it goes down here, and that stabilizes the whole bumper structure. So it's pretty good. So it's just one tab on each side, that tab down low on each side, this flat flange over here sitting on top of the 1 inch tube, and this diagonal that holds everything and keeps it from rotating, and that's pretty stable. Now I'm able to take the bumper out straight out off the car once the roll pan is in, and I won't have to worry about reaching in and around any of this structure. That bolt is exposed, this bolt is exposed, and this rod will be behind a removable panel on this side. And this also, there'll be a panel over here to cover up this mess, and that'll also be removable if you ever need to take the bumper off. Okay, it's commitment time. I know I said I was going to add to the top of this bumper, but in reality what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it below this yellow tape, which is probably the flattest area that I could find. I'm going to cut that, and then I'm going to raise, and I also cut this, narrow this up, and then I'm going to raise this up and add a piece in between those two pieces. That saves me the time of having to try and recreate this round over and the shape in this direction. I just have to raise this up to this line that I've already clearanced for 1 inch and 3/16, which 3/16 will be the gap, and then just 1 inch all the way around here is what I'll raise it up, and we'll see how that goes. Alright, so that's what it looks like with the top chopped off of it. Now it's time to space it up and see about mending the two pieces back together in the new location. So what I got going here is I've got a piece of 1.5 inch aluminum, and I've got it clamped to the inner side of this bumper to maintain the attitude or the slant, because this wants to slant, towards the quarter panel, upper quarter panel here in this direction. So this is already heading in that direction. So I've got this 1.5 inch piece of aluminum just clamped behind there. So this is my 1 inch piece that I'll be adding right to here. So this will go on top here and lay against that piece while I tack it into place. So that's what I'm up to now. Okay, there it is, kind of all Frankensteined in together right now. You can see there's the 1 inch filler piece that I added in all the way along here. This is the upper piece that came off of here. It had to be cut here in order to bring these two halves together a little bit, as you can see, because as you bring it up, it wants to curve in a little bit, so it wants to be a little bit shallower. Also, it's further that way, following the slope in this direction over here. So as you move this in further, that would be sticking out almost 1/4 inch in that direction. So it had to be cut vertically and then tucked this way, and then another piece had to be put in to make the transition. And thankfully, this will all be painted, so this won't be an issue as far as getting this all to be 100% blended out. And I also narrowed the gaps around here and here, sharpen them up a little bit, of course, when we do the Bondo work. But then after I get done that side, we'll be moving these openings up so that they're up 1 inch also. So that's the main visual right there, is getting that up higher, shortening these down a little bit. Anyway, okay, so that's stage one. It took me about 6 hours to get that all welded up and ground off, but now it has an extra inch. That looks a little shorter, but now these look like they're a little too low, so I'm going to be cutting these openings out and also moving them up about 1 inch to try and give this whole thing a little bit more balance. Of course, I don't have a roll pan on there yet, which that'll add a little bit of dimension to this also, so it'll help out somewhat. But I still think I need to get these taillights just up a little bit higher than where they're at. They're just a little too low on the car, in my opinion. But anyway, that's where we're at right now.